Hello there, Dr. Jonah Schenker. We are here for Leading for Deeper Learning. We're back at the New York State Education Department. Today, I have the privilege of sitting down with two of our deputy commissioners, Angelique Johnson-Dingle and Jason Harmon. We are looking at a revolution here in the New York State education system. We're going to tell some stories about the Blue Ribbon Commission and how that drove the New York Inspires framework. We're going to dig into those transformations. You're going to hear why and how this is rooted in student voice. You're going to hear about the flexibility and the encouragement to think about what this means for your unique system, how to lead this forward, and really paint the path and picture that will co-author the next chapter for us here in New York. I'm super excited to be kicking this episode off here with our colleagues, some of our leaders from the department. Here we go. Hello, everybody. We are here back at the New York State Education Department. I am super excited today to have a conversation with two guests who agreed to come in and talk about just a couple of the small things that are happening here in the great state of New York. I'm joined with two of our deputy commissioners, Angelique Johnson-Dingle and Jason Harmon. Really, them and their teams, the architects behind New York Inspires and what's happening here in New York. So we've got lots to talk about. I know you have lots to share. Excited for you to be able to share that with our listeners. But I want to first start off with just a little bit about who you are, your leadership journey. This is a big moment in time, and you are here in these leadership positions. So, who are you? What systems, brought you here? What motivates you? And then we'll jump in. So either of you who want to kick us off, there is no order of the conversation today.
All right. Well, since my name begins with A,
Perfect.
I think I'll start off first.
True school person.
So thank you really for taking the time and giving us an opportunity to chat with you a little bit about the work. But who is Angelique Johnson-Dingle? I am a married mom of three and ultimately have enjoyed 20 plus years in the field of education. I have taught early childhood, I've taught elementary school, I've even taught high school, and have even served as a building level administrator. But what led me to this actual position was during my time as serving as district superintendent for Western Suffolk BOCES, for just over 6 years, I want to say. I was fortunate enough to actually interview for this position of deputy commissioner, which I absolutely was terrified about, right? I really said to myself, are you able to do this, Ange? Like this is a pretty big step. And truly, it was the support from Jason, who was already here at the department, talking with Commissioner, talking with other folks within SCD, that really gave me the courage to take the leap into this role. I have to say I was so nervous coming into it because the responsibility, when you realize there are over 2 million children in the K-12 system that you are helping to make recommendations regarding policy for and understand the impact that can have, that's a bit unnerving. But through it all, at the end of the day, I just want what's best for all kids and for all children to have the opportunities that they would like to have access to be able to achieve and to do whatever their hearts desire.
That's awesome. And, I'm not a full-time podcast host, as both of you know. I get the privilege to work as district superintendent and in partnership to help carry out the work and vision of both of you and the department and the commissioner. And I'll just leave it at we are fortunate as a state to have you guiding this work, your heart and your mind and how you show up. That's what makes a difference. So I'm sharing that before we kick off, and now we get to hear a little bit about your journey, sir.
Yeah, thanks. And again, I appreciate the opportunity for the conversation and being able to dive a little bit into what we both think is probably the most exciting work that we've ever done. I know I can say that for myself. For me, this goes back quite a ways. I just started my 20th year in education. Took a little bit of a less traditional path. My formal background is as a high school social studies teacher, but actually started out as a museum educator, and being able to see firsthand the power of sort of non-traditional learning environments for kids. And whether that was something in a museum space or out in the community somewhere, but those sort of extensions of what happens in the classroom is a really substantial foundation stone for me. And so moved from there through a BOCES for a couple of years out in the Southern Tier area, before uprooting and relocating my family up here to the department a little over 10 years ago, to be able to do some really exciting work on a different scale, sort of moving from a regional to a state scale. And like Angelique said, I think this has been our partnership over the last 3+ years has been, I think, just some really great work of trying to look at a system differently, and to make sure that it really truly is serving students in the way that they deserve to be served, of making sure that the model works for them, sets them up for success long term, understanding that there's obviously some pretty big implications to that for us as the adults, but knowing ultimately, for me, this goes back, like I said, to some deeper roots. I can remember as a young parent trying to figure out some school things for my kids. I've got 4 kids at home, and a seasoned administrator in our region, who I trusted and valued his perspective, said something to me about sort of the traditional schooling model and how it would take just a matter of years before some of the natural curiosity and the types of thinking and the types of learning that my kids really enjoyed, before that would be, that light would start to diminish.
Yeah.
And I thought, boy, if I ever get an opportunity to turn that function off, I'm going to try to take advantage of that. And I think that's exactly what we're pointed at now, is making sure that that light stays on for kids throughout the entirety of their experience into whatever pathway they ultimately want to choose for themselves.
Yeah, I mean, so much in there resonates with me. I'm thinking about, as you talk about these experiences in the museum career, and the learning that was happening there, the pieces that I think back and connect to are often things that took place outside of kind of how we define currently classrooms, right? And that's something we need to kind of probe at, like what's behind that. But before we jump in, again, just, and not because we do this every time, but again, appreciation for who you are in this role, your accessibility, your patience, your expertise and willing to listen. Those carry out through the state, and it's heard the responsiveness of the department, and that is, I think, a direct result of many folks. But you two happen to be sitting here, so appreciation for that. I think that if relationships and human connection are foundational, we can go anywhere, right? Absent that, we're going to have issues. And so, before we get into details, this shift stemming from a body of work that pulled together voices from all facets of community and school in the Blue Ribbon Commission, and in turn, recommendations that you both then and teams took to drive the New York Inspires framework. This is not a small initiative. This is a revolution of a system. That's how I think about it. That's how I talk about it. And so that's happening on your leadership watch. So at what point, at what moment, what insight made it clear that this was the time to really again, this isn't a standards rollout. This is the movement out of an industrial model of schooling, which we know has foundational elements that are not about all. They're not about pathways. It's not always student centered. And before I turn that over to you, I think it's important. I always make the disclaimer that I don't believe that we have a teacher or a leader or a staff problem in this state. We have wonderful humans working really hard. The container in which we ask them to do their job is tragically outdated and flawed, and not about belonging. It's not about access and all the things you talked about. So why now? What moment was the trigger for you to say, like, this is the right time? Let's do this.
Yeah, so ultimately, the graduation measures initiative really does date back to 2019, before the pandemic. And it all started when our current Commissioner Rosa, who then was the chancellor at the time, wrote an article in On Board questioning our graduation measures and requirements, and if it was about time to rethink those things. And at the time that we began the work, I at that time was a district superintendent at that BOCES, but was fortunate enough to be able to participate in one of the stakeholder engagement sessions that were held in Suffolk County. And then we had a little something called the pandemic, which kind of put everything on hold for a little bit. And we started it back up again shortly thereafter. And then Jason was appointed as deputy, then I stepped into the role. And ultimately, when we looked at the feedback that we received from parents, from teachers, from principals, from superintendents, from business and industry, from institutions of higher education, and everyone is sharing the same sentiment, that kind of sticks out to you to say, you know what, we really need to look at doing something differently. And really, the 68 members who sat on the Blue Ribbon Commission, it was their passion and really their drive to think outside of the box and really make recommendations to us completely on their own. I have to say, when we actually had a convening where we brought all of the Blue Ribbon Commission members together to Albany, and for 3 days, they literally sat in a room and really debated with each other. And we stood on the outskirts of it, literally just standing there just to offer assistance if they had a question about something. But really, those 12 recommendations came from the Blue Ribbon Commission members themselves. We did not dictate that to them. It was really up to them to decide for what they thought would be best based upon their roles, their experience, and expertise. And so I do want to just acknowledge all of those commission members for having the foresight and really to be courageous enough to really recommend something different for the students of the state of New York. That is first. The second point were the students for me. As a mother of 3, I have to say, my children always remind me that I'm like the old lady in the room, right? Just as kids are really good at doing. But it really came from listening to the students. I mean, we spent months holding student advisory meetings, asking students what would they like to see differently about their high schools. And students, again and again, told us they would love to have the opportunity to do more with school as opposed to just sitting in a classroom all day long. And really, they are the driving force behind this for us. It isn't about what Jason or I would want, because this work isn't about us. It is really about us dedicating our lives and really being service-minded to be able to help provide students with a school environment that helps prepare them for what it is that they choose to do. It is important that students know that they are supported and that really teachers should be the facilitators of the learning, right? Students have to own their own learning. They have to develop their own knowledge, mindsets, and skills. And as the adults, we're supposed to be there to support that for them.
Yeah. I really, and we'll slide over, Jason, to you in a second to kind of dial into if there was any kind of significant moments that were kind of the gatekeeper. But I really appreciate you taking a minute to go back to 2019 to honor that story. Because I don't know if everybody in the state knows the history, and if we intend to kind of write this next chapter, the power of story is critical, right? Like we need to keep repeating that and telling it, and then the invitation to move forward. So thank you for kind of really situating that at the core, and of course, if we keep the students at the core, then we should be able to design anything. We're not designing for adults. We're designing for students. So,
yeah, and I think that storytelling function, Jonah, is exactly where I was going to go. Right. I mean, I think when we've made it a real priority in our work to get out into schools and into districts around the state. Right, geographically diverse schools, schools of all different sizes, focus areas, right? The populations that they serve, big, small, the whole, you name it. And I think for me, it's probably a little bit of like a light switch moment of something going on, and more, like a dimmer, or sort of like a wave coming in when you realize the conversations that we've had with students in particular in all of those different diverse places around the state, when the story that you hear from all of those different sorts of perspectives is telling you the same thing,
right,
you better listen.
Right.
And I think that's the reality here. I think Commissioner in that article, turned something on in terms of what could be possible, but the opportunity to really move that forward and to hear from students about what they would like to see different, to talk about students who have gone through the system, what they felt like they could have benefited from, right? Students who didn't make it through their K-12 experience for a lot of different reasons, right, about what sorts of supports would have been helpful to them, what sort of opportunities would have been meaningful. When you start to really pull together, without much effort, a cohesive story from students who look different, who are coming from different places, different family backgrounds, different language backgrounds, all of those different sorts of things that are coming together around a single type of story, a single point of emphasis of this can't continue to be how we do things. Mm-hmm. For me, that's where you start to gain energy as it's like, yeah, this really is an area of not just knowing, at an individual level or at a policy making level, that this really is, folks are very interested in seeing something different for themselves. What we heard from kids, what we heard from parents about wanting to see different sorts of opportunities for their students. Again, I'll go back in a very personal way. My own dad graduated from high school on a Friday. He went to work for a company. Right. The following Monday, he spent 45 years there.
Right.
And he always told us, he said, listen, if you choose a pathway, he was in the trades, he was in construction. He said, listen, if you choose that pathway, I'll fully support you. But he always felt like that pathway chose him. And I think we're at a place right now where there's a critical mass of adults who are saying, let's make sure that kids have what they need to choose pathways going forward for themselves, and that we get away from the dynamic where pathways are choosing kids. And that right now is what makes me so excited about this work, is the opportunity for kids to see and to be able to seize those sorts of pathways for themselves in a way that I don't think the current system really is designed to be able to do in the same way as what is moving forward as part of New York Inspires.
Yeah, I mean, that's, as I think back to you, talking about your children and helping them like figure out school, like right in that's problematic, right? Because learning is innate. We're wired to learn. We've just applied school over that, and you talked about like these elements of curiosity or joy or wonder like beginning to seep out because of it's a well-designed system. It's just designed to do the things that what I'm hearing you both don't stand for and hope for. And I think, our industrial model of schooling is based on the concept of average, right? Like how to do the most amount of good for this middle group. And so we've had to create enrichment or accommodations on either side. And we often think about, in design work as designing for those furthest from opportunity, and it benefits everybody, right? And in that are, I think, what I'm really, really hopeful that I see in these transformations in the outline of what the next story is going to look like. And so I'd like to begin to kind of jump into the framework a little bit. Recommendations turned into transformations over a 4 planning plus 3 phase approach is the kind of high level construct of the New York Inspires. So from that high level, some of the challenges that this framework attempts to address, and how will this work redefine what it means to be a graduate in New York?
So I think I would like to just start off a little bit about understanding who our students are, first and foremost. Part of the work that when we spent time meeting with the Blue Ribbon Commission members, and we met once a month for about a year, we started every meeting with students, right? And allowing students who are often forgotten about to tell a little bit about their story and what their school experience was like for them. So we had students participate to share with us who were in the military. We had students who were identified as a student with a disability, and one student talked about always feeling like that, he was always coined as the kid with the IEP. Hearing from students who were involved with our juvenile justice system and the struggles that they've had to try to overcome to be able to earn a high school diploma. So in hearing directly from the students, and I have to tell you, there were some stories where there was not a dry eye on that Zoom call because they were just so powerful, and the students were comfortable enough to be vulnerable and tell us very honestly what it was that they were experiencing in school, so that way we understood how to look at it to try to make it better. So one of the first shifts that we're looking at in moving to a single diploma, hearing parents speak and share about the challenges that their child faces when they graduate with a diploma that isn't really recognized by anyone other than us in a school district is a challenge for us, because what is that child supposed to be set up to do after they leave high school? Identifying and adopting the New York State Portrait of a Graduate. In all the years of this New York State Education Department, we have not had a singular message that spoke to what we expect all students to be able to do once they graduate from high school. So this was where the idea of adopting a portrait of a graduate came from, for the state. Now, I know districts have portraits of a graduates, and that is phenomenal. And we are learning that more and more states are getting involved with this space. But one of the things that we wanted to do with our portrait of a graduate was to truly embed it in an everyday type of experience for children. We did not want it to just be an aspirational poster that sat on the wall of a classroom or at the front of a building. We really mean it when we say we want our students to reflect the knowledge, the skill sets, and the dispositions that are included in the portrait of a graduate, because we know and we understand from the work that we've done together with the Blue Ribbon Commission that those are things that kids need. And when you hear from, again, business and industry, because we brought in the Department of Labor to talk to us about what they are seeing, that their businesses are sharing with them. When you bring in institutions of higher ed and they are sharing, again, the same exact things that they are seeing in our students and what they need to work on, we have to pay attention to that. And really, that portrait of a graduate kind of serving as the foundation for what we will continue to build everything else on within the department is key. If our jobs are to make sure that children are prepared for their next steps, whether they go into college, whether they go into the workforce, whether they go into the military, there are some basic things that we need to make sure that every child has. And that's where the portrait of a graduate comes into play.
Yeah, I think the power from, in the portrait, in a lot of these spaces, right, is it's a picture of what a student is going to be able to do next, right? So in the current system, I graduate, I've got a certain amount of credits, I've passed a certain number of assessments. Those are all things that I've done.
Right.
But I think for a lot of folks, it's not clear, what does that mean about what I can do next?
Right.
And I think that portrait, to Angelique's point, is a great tool for the students who can demonstrate, right, those attributes. But for folks on the other side of that, colleges who are going to receive them in for, for additional learning there, for business and industry, for military, right, for wherever, to say, okay, now I've got a clearer picture of what this student is going to be able to do next, right? So that they're a critical thinker, all of those sort of attributes that are part of that, the things that they can do, it's I think, an even clearer picture of, again, in that sort of pathway line of thinking of what comes next. I know I can go down this particular pathway because I know I can do these things. I know I have these attributes. I think it creates an opportunity for a huge amount of agency for our students, and it creates some very clear signals to our partners on the other side of K-12 around, what those students are going, what they know and are able to do, what are their dispositions towards, towards learning or being able to engage as part of a team, or any of those sort of things. Again, that, like Angelique said, that we heard across the board are points of value, points of need, whether you're a higher ed or a business partner. I think that portrait creates that sort of dynamic. And so, again, far more than just a poster on a wall or a promotional slogan that you get to sort of once in a while, making that really the cornerstone of things, it, for me, is wildly exciting to have that sort of a tool at the core of where we're trying to go. Is one of the most exciting parts of this work.
Yeah, and I mean, we know one thing, which is there are elements of the future that are unknown. We know that and again, different portraits, different states, different schools, right? Maybe some different language, but they're all leaning into that same concept of these transversal skills that, regardless of what you're going to do, excuse me, these are the required attributes to be successful in next, whatever next is going to be, and not through the same lens, but in over the last decade, I've spent a lot of time having these same conversations around economic and workforce development, particularly around kind of the P-TECH model, but bringing together industry and college and saying, like, what do you really want to see when student X graduates? No matter whether it is a mom and pop machine shop, a large corporation, an industry partner, community partner, college or higher ed institution, it's the same set of skills, whether you ask it in New York, anywhere else in this country, or around the world. And I think the portrait of a grad, to your point, doesn't leave it arbitrary. It's not this skill set, like, teachers, you're going to handle this, but no, like, this is a set of competencies that are going to show up with as much value as other academic areas, et cetera. I think the other piece that I want to go into is something that you pointed out, which is students can talk about who they are against these. I've always joke around saying, like, I've been on a lot of job interviews. Nobody, and this has nothing to do with earth science. I actually quite like earth science, but nobody's ever asked me what I got on my earth science regents. Just has not been on the top 10 interview questions. But as you think about these competencies and then moving over to redefining learning experiences, all of a sudden you have students who are showing up to the table talking about who they are, what they're doing, what they can do. That's really, really exciting work. And so, so in the portrait of a grad and these shifts, there's some timelines. One of the pieces that I think is really genius of this is it doesn't say that September we're going to start this. It says at the end of phase 1, here's some of the things we hope to be true. That's a beautiful runway for districts, especially in New York. We have a lot of beautiful things happening. Like, you're not asking people to let everything go, but bring wonderful things forward, let some things go, design some new, and see where it's at. Moving from kind of the conceptual framework to around portrait of a grad, around redefining learning experiences, are there some tangible things that you can share with folks who might be listening, districts, leaders? What would this look like? And I know there's other things happening, Plan Pilot, looking at exemplars, but what would this look like if a district asked you, okay, at the end of this, what should we be doing? We've got this 5-day by 8-period schedule. We do siloed academics. We've got some cool things happening in there. Help me give some insight to folks about, at the end of this, what it might look like.
Yeah, so I think as we travel around the state and we talk with schools and school leaders, we speak with teachers, we always look to speak with students. I think what I would recommend for every school to do is start some conversations with your students, right? And ask your students, what else would they like to see as part of their school day? What types of additional projects or experiences would they like to have, given the context of the district, because we know how diverse the state of New York is. You have really rural school systems in place, and then you have these really large urban educational settings like New York City, right? So I would start there with the students. And then from there, I would challenge our local school folks to be creative about what that school day looks like. There is nothing in our regulations that say that school has to be this formatted this way every single day for 8 to 9 periods a day. There are actually flexibilities that allow schools to go into block scheduling, to be able to do a humanities approach where you're bringing in history, ELA, and the arts at the same time. Like, those are things that can already be done, but I think we're so used to doing what we've always done that that's what we continue to do.
Right.
So hopefully that starting place would challenge folks to be creative, but make sure that they're basing it on what the needs and requests of their students are.
Right.
Yeah, I would agree. I think asking the question, right, if you could make this look, in an ideal way of teaching and learning, what would you have it look like? And Jonah, you mentioned this earlier, right? Like, we don't have an issue of we don't have a teacher issue. We don't have a lack of hard work or a lack of a willingness to try to do what's best for kids. We really have a container issue here, right? And so I think what we want folks to know is, like, listen, we're building a new wineskin intentionally to fit new wine into, right? And so thinking about, what would this look like if it were ideal? Again, I'm a social studies guy by nature. Social studies is not about sort of I close one chapter with a hard stop and then I go on to the next chapter, or I'm teaching one European history and then I have to close that book and then go on to US history, right? Sort of the interrelationship between things. And I think, again, starting to have some conversations around what could or should it look like if it didn't have to be that sort of model. And I think even just starting those conversations, I think right now there's a tremendous opportunity. There is a bunch about this that we have a pretty concrete sense of where we want to try to go. There's a fair amount of this that is still, in process. It's still wet cement, right? Things aren't set. And I think folks right now, rather than waiting to see, right, what is the department going to bring forward, should be having conversations locally around what do we want this to look like inside of our local context? What do we value, right? To really start having some of those conversations. Because again, I think if there's something, I'd like to think, if there's something about how the department has approached this work going back to 2019, it's that we want to have those conversations with you, right? For folks to not ask the question, hey, can I do this thing?
Right.
But instead to be asking, how can I do this thing that we know that we want to do, that our kids have told us they want to be able to do? How can we do that? Not can we do that? You've got to know what you want to do, right? So that you can ask those sorts of questions. And I think there really is an opportunity right now before this gets, moving into some of those more concrete spaces, for folks to sit down and say, if we could design our building, if we could arrange resources, right? Whether it's people's expertise, whether it's time, you mentioned that 5x8 block. I think a lot of those things, we need to be having some conversations about, is that how we would do it if we could make this the way that we thought was truly in the best interest of our kids? I think now is the time to start having some of those conversations. What values are driving your work? What vision do you have? Because I think what we're trying to create is a new container where a lot of those things are going to be able to fit inside of that. But you've got to know what content, what version of this you want to fit inside of a very new and different container.
Yeah, I mean, there's this perceived rigidity. And that's actually not true. Currently, I mean, there's already inherent flexibility that you can push into or lean into. I mean, I've seen it in our work around our waiver for our APPR many years ago. It's a beautiful system. I think we're ahead of the curve for this next iteration because it's a system that really locks into the growth of teachers. And it isn't distilled to a checklist or walkthroughs that are based on a rubric. This is about conversations about like, where do you want to get, and nothing changed. There was a perceived rigidity, and so I love this calling out to the field, because absent that conversation up front, and you keep bringing it back to. Start with the students, which I think again we could say that 30 more times, right? That's where it should start. But these conversations up front for individual districts to, again, I talk about co-design or co-author, right? A community that's going to build this vision of what could be. Forget about everything else, and then working with in the constructs to say, how can we make this happen? I think kind of where we started with, and really my appreciation for both of you, and in turn the department, is a department who shows up today wanting to find solutions to make those things happen. And I think that's really important for the field to say is like, no, don't let anything constrain you. If students are saying this and you want to build this, then let's partner to get that done. And what it looks like in New York City or Westchester or near Buffalo or Rochester, there's room for a unique way of getting at that. So I think that's a really, the calling to actually like have these conversations right now. That's the most important work, because otherwise I'm afraid things will roll out and people will say, we do this and that checks the box. We do this. And then we've lost the transformation magic, right? Or the transformations that need to happen.
Yeah. I think, Angelique brought up a great point earlier, and you just hit on it again, right? As we're thinking through this work, right, from our seats, we're talking about a container that has to work inside of the largest school system in the country, all the way down to school systems that in a kindergarten through 12th grade have enrollments of less than 100 students. From a policy perspective, that is a very difficult task. Yeah. Right? I think if there's one thing that makes this particularly difficult on our end, It's that construct, right, of just the diversity across the state in terms of making sure that we don't create a solution or create an opportunity for a solution that works in one place that's not doable in the other. The thinking here really is around, right, if you, I'm a word picture guy, right, if I give you 8 different ingredients out of the pantry, you could make 1 million different, cakes out of those 8 ingredients, right? Depending on the ratios and how you apply them and all of those sort of things. And I think what we want to say to folks is, listen, these are the non-negotiable ingredients.
Right.
Locally, what we're not going to tell you is make exactly this cake, right? You're going to have some flexibility based on the local level, right? Your regional conversations that you're having, certainly, right, influence from the state and the national conversations that are going on. But at a core level, these ingredients are at your disposal,
right,
to serve your students.
Right.
And so how do you want to mix them together? What do you want this to look like? And so that's where we want to continue to see people push the conversations forward. Again, when we have this conversation around, equitable access to things, the Board of Regents, our chancellor has been very clear, right? Equity is never going to be truly achieved and can never come at the expense of excellence, right? That has to be baked in to the equation of what folks are thinking about in the conversations that they're having locally, right? That's a non-negotiable. That manifests itself in lots and lots and lots of different ways and lots of different types of experiences for students that don't mean that my district has to look the same as Angelique's or has to look the same as yours. There's still a lot of room to operate even inside of a common set of elements.
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes this really exciting, is that sort of flexibility with the commonality. The other piece that I'll mention here, and just I think it's really important for folks to know this, that there are lots of systems in play here, right? Some of them are more flexible than others, right? I happen to have, right, I'm really privileged to work here at the department with the teams that are currently overseeing, right, state assessment, right, and accountability, information and reporting services, right? Folks who are doing really great work, but systems that tend to be viewed as a little bit more rigid inside of this construct, right? I mean, let's be honest.
Right.
I think what I would love for folks to know is those folks are at the table with us thinking through this, right? How can we grow and evolve and change our state assessment strategy to be consistent and reflective of this conversation rather than driving this conversation? How are we ultimately going to change an accountability system, a system of differentiating supports to schools and districts that is reflective of this system, not a driver of this system? And so we're poised to be able to do those sorts of things, even in systems that tend to be viewed as a little bit more rigid, a little bit more like this is just how it has to work. We're exploring ways of how those systems are going to be able to grow and change as well, and to try to put some things back in order, which is namely that teaching and learning function and all of the different ways that could or should look like that we're excited about for New York Inspires, and having those other systems be in support and advancement of that. I think that's a really critical piece that we're talking about, but a lot of folks just don't understand that those same players are at the table thinking through where we're trying to get to and are fully on board with the vision that's out there right now.
And the interconnectedness of those systems that are within the system that have stood the test of time or are rigid. First of all, it's beautiful that those folks are at the table. I think it's beautiful that that I'm hearing we want to create this vision of what can be, and not have these become barriers, but actually augment or propel or help drive. And so, as you talked about, and I think it's really important that the non-negotiables, so to speak, are clear, right? Like you can cook whatever cake you want, but here's 5 ingredients that you have to use. So there's a lot of, and again, just in conversations, a lot of kind of questions around the credits, right? Currently 22 credits, 5 Regents exams, transcripts, standards or reformatted standards, the single transcript. So those are some of those kind of things that will happen or they're dropped in throughout the phases. a peek into your planning. Has there been any developments? Is there any shape, anything else to share around those kind of buckets within the framework that would be helpful for folks to hear? I mean, again, I know you lots of design work and but is there any shareables around those areas for where you are currently?
So I think right now we are still in the process of finalizing our portrait of a graduate. We do anticipate bringing it forward to the public. I believe our timeline says summer of 25, and we are still on target to do so. And I just want to share out there that what is out there currently now is a draft of what was created based upon the recommendations from the Blue Ribbon Commission members. However, I think that we may see some adjustments to that, not anything dramatic, but just some slight adjustments to make sure that it is encompassing of all. I will share. So we are very excited to be able to get to that point. We are hopeful that we will receive the funding that we requested in this year's budget to be able to do some work around the New York State learning standards. We do publish 12 sets of standards that teachers must teach students within their schools. But I will tell you, one of the things that has always been just a little bit of a thorn in my side was the fact that we just have way too many standards. And they're actually not formatted to actually work well together, right? So I think, once we know what the portrait is and that serves as our foundation, then we can use that to then go into our standards and say, okay, now how does this uplift this? And really being able to connect the two together. And also at the same time, giving, I would say, our stakeholders, the opportunity to weigh in on some of the adjustments that we need to make. Like, we would love to see more interdisciplinary work happening in our schools, because the truth of the matter is there isn't a single job that any of us does on our own without the support and help from someone else. So why are we continuing to educate our children in silos in that way? So just being able to even restructure the standards so that way the same terminology is used throughout to create those through lines for children to see where they do connect will be incredibly helpful for them as they move forward beyond our K-12 system.
Awesome. So not necessarily all the bodies of standards undergoing these massive changes, but really an alignment so that conversations around synergy and crosswalking, there's a consistency in format to do that. And then I heard also making sure in those standards that it's uplifting the work. And so, to me, that doesn't sound like a barrier or a wait for, you have to wait for this. Like, no, let's get started. Do that visioning work. Start with students and make sure you're identifying voices that you've missed in the conversation. And then we'll be adding these things throughout that will uplift your vision, and where there may be tension or resolution to make it happen, let's have those conversations about how do we get this done. Right? That sounds like an invitation more than a initiative.
Yeah, well, interestingly enough, when we travel around the state to speak, we run into groups of folks who say, is there any way you can do this faster? I mean, really, 5 years is just way too long. And then you run into people who say, this is a lot all at one time. I think we need to slow things down a little bit. So we're never able to find that happy medium in between. But one thing that I will share is that we have intentionally built that plan the way that we've built it to ensure we had continuous conversations with the fields. Right? We are not interested in closing ourselves in a room with our teams and building this work out on our own. That's not how we would like to approach this. We believe that ultimately our children is everyone's responsibility.
Yep.
So we want to pull in other people to help guide us, to help us do this work together, because again, they are our responsibility. So having those conversations, making sure that the public is involved, whether it is through meetings, whether it is through our thought exchange questions that we put out to help have conversations in a virtual manner, that is incredibly important to us. And we do listen, we do review that feedback, and it does help inform the work that we are putting forward.
Yeah, I think the work of the portrait is a really great example of that. Right? I mean, Angelique mentioned we're going to come out. We're still on track with the timeline. There are going to be adjustments. Those adjustments came from a total of, I think it was 89 different BRC ambassador convenings that were hosted all across the state, right? Folks who had been on that committee, great collaboration with our BOCES superintendent colleagues to be able to bring folks back together, right? Thousands of points of input, right? In order to make adjustments to that. Right. And so I think you'd be hard pressed to point to any part of this process that hasn't started with an invitation to a conversation to be able to move this forward. And to Angelique's point, you cannot continue that model without giving it some room to breathe. I think there's a lot of folks across the state who have been at this for a little while, who have in their experience previous initiatives where that wasn't how things worked. I don't think we've heard a single person yet who said, yeah, let's do that again. Right. And so I think we understand, right? For some folks, it feels like this is going to be, like they could go faster, and they probably could. The reality is, right, there are folks who are already doing some of the types of teaching and learning. They have the sorts of spaces and environments that we would love for all kids to have. And there are some folks who are not there yet. And so sort of finding that balance where we can learn from each other, but also recognizing that there are some very different capacity, when you're talking about some of the systems across New York State. And so I think building in that sort of breathing space to give folks a chance to, let's think deeply about something, let's try it, right? Let's see what worked and didn't work, for whom, right? Can we do it again, those things that worked, and then be able to move forward rather than this just sort of like day by day where there's not enough room to take a pause and to be reflective before we move forward. And so I think that's part of why the framework, is the way that it is. When Angelique says that's an intentional design, that's an intentional design. If we felt like we could go faster, I think in those places we will press to be able to do that. But again, there's a lot of investment that's going to need to happen to accomplish sort of the full scale of what we're talking about here, right? Managing that change, making sure that people feel like they're being set up to succeed, whether you're talking about students, whether you're talking about classroom teachers, building leaders, district leaders, parents, the broader community. You need to have enough space to be able to make sure that at least those conversations can be had along the way. And I think that's what that's the balance that we've tried to strike in the framework that we've put out. So
and just personally, in my work in helping to shape this in my region, support our districts in thinking about these questions, I am so appreciative that actually the details are not here. Because I know as soon as a set of new standards, or you can do this, as soon as some of those details come out, they're school people. They're going to go and want to get that done, and it will be premature if we haven't had those conversations that we were talking about, if we haven't painted the picture of what it's going to look like for me in Ulster County, in our school districts, or for them with their communities to do that. And so that's critical as we think about this work. And I was thinking about like the structure to help support districts over phase 1, 2, and 3, where we actually arrived was set 2 and 3 down, because we're making an assumption that we actually know what 1 is going to yield. Mm-hmm. So let's do that work. And then when we have information, because we can add reformatted standards or let regents become decoupled or move to a transcript or in any of those structures. And I think at the core, something that you both talked about is something that everybody knows. We don't have to wait for that. There are things in our schools that need to change. There are instructional strategies and shifts that need to happen. You've asked the students, everyone's heard from the students, like, you don't have to wait for, let's start making those changes. Those changes will receive anything that comes down the line. And so I appreciate both of your thinking and the intentionality of the framework, kind of moving towards the tail end, like kind of a final thought or a final question that I'd like you to consider, which is really your message. This Leading for Deeper Learning is an intentional format to help tell the story and curate things as we move forward. But if the expectation is that these things are going to happen in the classroom between or outside of a classroom, but between a teacher and a student, then we need leaders who will create the conditions for this work to happen from the systems level down to the building level. So your message to really leaders, because that's the focus here, but then again to students and families across New York as we kind of dive further into this journey, what's your message to them, your hope for them, your wish for them, your challenge to them, so that we co-create this new lived experience for all students in New York?
I think I would challenge people to think outside of the box, to allow their minds and the creativity to come into play to create an environment where the experiences are centered on students first, and that the adults are there to support and to facilitate. That would ultimately be my message. And I want to encourage students to not be afraid to use their voices, to speak up for the things that they believe that they need in order to continue to be successful in our systems. It is then and only then do we truly understand what changes need to be made. Understanding and knowing that almost 33% of our graduating seniors do not go on to college tells us that we need to have a deeper understanding of where children are when they get into those last couple of years of high schools. And everyone may need something that's just a little bit different, but I challenge us to allow ourselves to be creative enough to create those spaces for students.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think I would probably put something very similar out there in terms of a challenge. I think now is a really critical time to be evaluating, again, inside of I don't care whether you're talking about inside of a classroom level system or a district level system, even a regional system, right? What are you doing right now that you're doing because of inertia? Because that's what we've done, that's what I inherited, versus what are we doing intentionally, right? And I'm talking about at a policy level, at a program level, at a grade level team level, at an individual practitioner level. Why am I doing what I'm doing the way I'm doing it? And is it ultimately getting me where I want to go? I think that's a really critical conversation. I think there are some factors right now that are forcing folks in that direction, right? The sunsetting of some of these pandemic funds, and really, causing that return on investment sort of conversation of, am I getting what I want to from what I'm doing?
Right.
And I think that's not always, or our minds tend to go to the money side of that. But even just with people's time, right? When you're talking about students' time, a teacher's time, a building leader's time, parents' time, right? When it comes to that education space, is what we're doing really intentional and point it at where we want to go, and how much of that is just sort of inertia of this is how it's been for a really long time.
Right.
And I think we're at a really critical point where we've got to know and be doing some things on purpose. And I think, again, I think New York Inspires for us is trying to do something different on purpose, right? This is not about just doing something different to do something different. This is about doing something different on purpose in a particular way. And I think that lens, again, we don't have it all sorted out. We certainly don't have all of the answers, but that lens, that line of thinking, I think the more that we can apply that question into the systems inside of education, the better served we're going to be coming out of this work 5 years from now. I think the other reality, the other challenge, and Jonah, I'm glad that you said what you did, is I think it's a little bit of a false line of thinking that 5 years from now we will be at the finish line of this work. Right? That I think we've got to take sort of, whatever you want to call that term, sort of an infinite mindset of 5 years from now, we're going to have to be asking the same sorts of critical questions that we're asking now. What do our kids need? And what are we going to do to make sure that those needs and opportunities are met?
Yeah.
That question is going to be relevant 5 years from now, and maybe in a different way. The context may look different, but that question is going to be critical 5 years from now. And so let's stop thinking about this as we're here and we're going to get to a finish line 5 years from now. We will be in a different place, I hope, 5 years from now. But that question is going to be important then too. And so let's set aside some of those timeline barriers and some of that finish line thinking, and let's focus on how are we going to, what are we going to do next in order to start rethinking and being intentional on behalf of our kids. Yeah.
I don't think we have an option, right? I mean, if we design our new system stuck, we aren't embracing the theory of change that will continually be there, right? Like, there will be new and emerging skills that have to be incorporated in. So let's not get as we work out of a system that was designed really well for its time and to do what it did. Perhaps this new system is about never hitting the finish line, but being nimble enough to adapt to students who are whispering in our ears, hey, we need this, and the emerging skills and preparing students for what is next. So I know I am super, super hopeful. I am blessed to be a district superintendent during this time, leading this work in my region and in partnership and for the department. I take this work really, really seriously. I think when I think about this, this is multi-generational work. This is work that shifts the trajectory and landscape for generations to come. And I'm taking it that seriously. And I just, again, want to thank you from really the bottom of my heart for the content that you're sharing is awesome. The things that you're doing are awesome. But how you show up to the work is what gets me excited to be able to go out and leave and work with districts to continue to promote that. I want there, as Angelique, you said, every student needs a little something different. And currently those things that are a little different have different measures of success that we've tied to them. And it isn't about a singular academic pathway. It's just not. How do we connect passion and joy and those experiences so that every unique story is looked at just as successful and we can do that connection work? So on behalf of, I know the folks that I get to work with on my team, thank you so much for taking a couple minutes to share your hearts and your minds on leading for deeper learning. Exciting work ahead. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.